Christa has presented solo exhibitions at Aviatrix Berlin, Plug Projects Kansas City, Hudson Valley College Troy, New York, Three Walls here in Chicago, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland. Her residencies include the Max Planck Institute residency in Berlin in last year, and in 2013, the Can Serrat residency in El Bruc, Spain. I said I'd say a little bit more about Propeller. I was going to do that earlier, but it's a co-administered project that we do with Three Walls that gives out grants to independent artist-run projects, of which Cultural Reproducers is one. So as I said, I'll let Christa talk about her work, and I can't wait. Thank you, Christa.
Thanks so much, Lorelei. Okay, hi. This is a kind of an unscripted talk, so I'm going to improvise a little bit. If people have questions as I'm going, you can interject them anytime, although you can also ask at the end. So I'm just going to improvise here. So my work for, I don't know, the past very long time has always had to do with the human body in some way. I think the work in my show right now, it might be maybe less obvious how the body fits in, but it's still very much a part of my thinking, my thought process. And I've always really been interested in using paper to, as this ephemeral material, to kind of translate physical sensation or something about the body into something visible. And the body is visible, right? But the idea of translating something like physical sensation or our emotional connection to our bodies is kind of a different act. And for me, it's both a sort of a personal act and it's also something that's political, because in the late 1800s, when we were just finding out about microscopes and getting all these new ways to image the body, we suddenly knew about bacteria, and we knew about all of these reasons why the body gets sick. We were able to identify what it is that makes a body well, quote unquote, or not well. And so that really shaped how we deal with certain illnesses. So there were a lot of medical conditions, a lot of physical conditions that don't fit under the umbrella of things that you can find visually. There are a lot of invisible chronic illnesses like endometriosis, like migraines, things that often afflict women, things that have afflicted me, that we can't see the source of. And so from a very, very, very early time, those kinds of conditions were treated as something else. And a lot of women were put in mental institutions because it was all sort of put under the umbrella of hysteria. So for me, that visualizing of the body is has been a really important thing in my work, and a way to translate my own experience in ways that are maybe separate from the typical anatomical imagery that we find. So that comes from both my own experience and also from I have done a lot of interviews, had a lot of conversations with other people about their experience with the body and how they translate that just for themselves. This is a sort of a close-up of a graphic narrative that I made as a grad student here, actually, based on a conversation I had with a friend of mine about how she used to sort of mentally deal with her abdominal pain by painting it away in her mind. And I was really interested in that process. That's something that I do in my own way. But I was interested in the kinds of imagery that we come up with to cope with physical sensation, or the kinds of structures that we imagine inside of our bodies that aren't something you're going to find on a chart at the doctor's office. Yeah. So that's kind of where I enter into this whole process. So this process often involves kind of a blend of personal narrative, mine or other people's, and actual biology. I'm very interested in actual biology. I'm very interested in science and in medicine and in things going on in the scientific realm and in the biology of other organisms as well as human biology. And I'm also interested in science fiction. And I think a lot of times these things kind of intersect for me and for writers, for other people as well. So when I was diagnosed with endometriosis, which wasn't until I think I was a grad student also, And I learned that I would probably be, I learned that I might be unable to have a child, which was something that I had always sort of thought I would do. I was really trying to process that in different kinds of ways, and I was I was getting very sci-fi about it, and I was looking at these drawings I had found of these debutantes with these huge puffy sleeves, and I was thinking, oh, what if they were, what if those girls were hiding like illicit pregnancies under their puffy sleeves? I was just being kind of, it's kind of a goofy way to think about it. But there's this phenomenon called an ectopic pregnancy, where the baby grows in the wrong place. Usually doesn't end well, but I was imagining these other sites. If your normal reproductive organs aren't working correctly, how else might you be able to undergo that process? Thinking about all the reproductive technologies that we have now, some of which are amazing and sometimes scary and and sci-fi. And I also did a project at that time where I was interviewing all of these women about their experiences and their own experience with the kind of combined themes of fertility and identity. And by discussing those themes, I mean, I was talking to people who never, ever want to have children, but for whom that was a pretty big, presence in their life. It was complicating their relationships with their partners in some cases. People who are egg donors, people who could not have children due to illness or due to, various complications, and then people who had many children and had become doulas and midwives and everything all across the spectrum. So I was really interested in these stories and in the kinds of metaphors that were coming out there. And at the same time, I was talking to, I was talking to a biologist that I know, who's also an artist, who is now my partner, about these issues. And he said, oh, well, this sort of sci-fi approach you have to the reproductive system, you should really look at these other animals, at other organisms, because what we consider to be normal is really just like one, I don't know, it's just one facet of what exists in the natural world in terms of reproduction, in terms of gendered pairing, in terms of all of these other things. So we started collaborating on this project that I was doing drawings, and we started working on a video project, an animation combined with live video, where we were looking at these biological models that other organisms, the biological reproductive systems of other organisms, and what those would look like if they were projected onto humans. So for instance, this is the reproductive system of the hydra, which reproduces asexually. It clones itself, and then tiny hydra babies grow off of its body. There's a cute baby. So tiny hydra babies grow off of the body of the parent, which is, again, like a completely different system than we use, but is very natural to the hydra. This one's based on a Suriname toad. Has anyone actually seen like a Suriname toad have reproduce? It's amazing. So the male like releases a bunch of sperm into the water and pushes it into the back of the female, not just rubs it into her back, and then these blisters grow, and at some point all of these tiny babies just like explode out of her back. It's disgusting. But beyond the sort of biological fact of that, I was really interested in what kinds of metaphors were opening up as I was grafting these other reproductive systems onto humans. I was like, whoa, there's a lot more going on there than just a different way of reproducing. There were a lot of anxieties there about parenthood, a lot of systems of power kind of coming into play. And I realized as I was making this work, I was also very anxious about the idea of, as much as I really wanted a child, I also had a lot of anxiety about what it would mean to if I had a child, what that would mean for my career, what that would mean for my identity, how things would change. And then, that biologist and I did another creative collaboration, which was this one. So this is my daughter Stella, who was born in 2011. And becoming a mother is really amazing. Many of you here know that. But I also gained a new understanding of, this message that I had always gotten and I always thought was I thought it must be really anachronistic. I thought it was really outdated. The idea that if you're a woman and you're an artist, you're going to at some point have to choose between having a career in the arts, being a successful artist, whatever that means, and having a family, raising a child. Those are not things that could happen simultaneously. And like a lot of women, I kind of rejected that idea. But once I had a kid, I was like, oh, there's some real reasons there. Reasons behind this idea, why it keeps getting perpetuated, and why even, recently Marina Abramovic and Tracy Emin have brought it up, right? They've restated this idea. They're keeping it current. So it's still a very current idea, I think, although a false one. So I'm just throwing these very general categories up here, but having a child, and like a lot of other challenges that may come up in your life, whether it's caring for an adult, caring for your parent, if they become, what happened? There. Whether it's caring for an adult loved one, or whether it's dealing with a chronic illness or any number of issues, there are these key issues that come up, right? There's the time to focus on your practice completely changes. Your relationship to time really, really changes when you have a child, when you're any kind of caregiver. Money, your relationship to money changes a lot because you need a lot more money suddenly, and you're making a lot less of it. There's a stigma in the sort of reputational economy. There's the stigma, obviously, that we just talked about, that your dedication to your career or your creativity is going to be suddenly cut off. And so there are a lot of assumptions made about whether you're serious about your career. There are a lot of artists I've spoken with who have been dropped by their galleries or dropped by residencies when they found out that they were going to have a baby. Although it's not usually worded that way. Sometimes it is. So there are some very, very definitive barriers there. And then there are other barriers like suddenly your access to art openings and lectures and performances is cut off. So your relationships with those places where you make your professional connections and those places where you maintain your intellectual stimulation are suddenly cut off, and you feel this really profound sense of isolation, and you kind of wonder if you're ever going to make it back in. So those are challenges, for sure. As I was in the midst of figuring all that out and just thinking about this profound experience that happens when you have a kid, and they're so cute. I was talking with other artists and art critics and curators that I knew who were dealing with this at the same time. This is not a new phenomenon, obviously. There have been artists raising kids for as long as there have been artists who have been women. But the conversations that were coming out of this at this time were really rich, and I was having a lot of conversations with a friend of mine named Selena Trepp, who is a really amazing artist as well. And we started pulling together other artists who also were raising kids, and we were thinking about if we could change something, if we could start with just addressing one or two problems at a time, what would those be, and how could we think through alternate models for them? How could we come together to generate something that would maybe address the isolation issue, or that would address the issue of timing of art events or childcare, these things that kind of create this really intergenerational divide between artist parents and other cultural workers, right? Like we don't get to be in the same space. So we started out just by having these really informal gatherings in our apartments, which limited who could come because our apartments are really small. But some really important conversations were starting there. And in the meantime, I also wanted to expand the conversation by through a website, right? So this is something that anybody can participate in, even if they can't leave the house, even if they can't fit into my apartment. And it also made it possible to include people from places outside of Chicago. So I started this website, Cultural Reproducers, when my daughter was about a year old, once things started to get a little bit more stable in my life. And so Cultural Reproducers as a website is an ongoing project. It's sort of a resource, a hub for online resources. We do a lot of interviews with artists raising kids. Some of them make work about parenthood and some of them completely don't. And that's really important to me, that it not be about just like mother artists making work about motherhood. There are men and women involved and everything in between, hopefully soon. So we do interviews, we do residency reports. We talk to artists who go to do residencies with their families along, and also those who decide to leave their kids at home and how they navigate that. And we have a lot of, we also have started this whole series of events, which I think I'm going to talk about in a minute. The Cultural Reproducers event series is a project that kind of grew out of this online project and the small conversations we were having in our homes. So at the same time that I was doing all of this very hands-on activist work with my community, I was also making a lot of drawings, and at the time, I don't think I really knew what I was doing. I mean, I know I didn't know what I was doing. I was just making these drawings. I was really interested all of a sudden in colonies of, I was thinking about these organisms that I had been looking at when I was doing the work about systems of reproduction, right? And I was thinking beyond the reproduction part. I was like, well, okay, so what if we could reproduce like that? But what if we had social systems like those animals? What if, like bees or ants or termites, what if our whole social system was run by females? Like, how would that change things? Probably, a lot of ways. So if we had these other kinds of collective structures and these different systems for care, how would that impact, the financial sector? How would that impact power hierarchies? How would all of these things kind of shift? And so that started to trickle into my drawings, and I was thinking a lot about these sort of female-run societies. This is a termite mound in Africa, but thinking about groups of people working together as if they were, if we were to restart, if we were to totally start over, and look at these other models outside of our own systems. Again, as I was with the reproductive systems, like, I think we get used to our own way of doing things as the only way to do things. So what if we just went way outside of that, but looked at something that has worked for some other organism for a very long time, and used that as a place to start from? So I was really interested in the world of social insects, as I mentioned. And I'm going to go back. This is the first time I've tried to weave together these two sides of my practice. It's kind of crazy. And as I was doing that in my drawings, I was also working with these members of Cultural Reproducers to try to think through some real life problems. Like the problem, it seems like a very simple one in some ways, but it's not. The problem of that most art events and most openings happen in the evenings, like Friday evenings, which is like the worst possible time to break away with your kid who really needs to eat and then sleep and then needs you there to facilitate that. And it's a very stressful time to drag them out. But it's also, you have to have money if you want childcare, quite a bit of money. So how could we create a system that would serve as a model? Not that we were going to solve this problem entirely, but how could we create a model for institutions that would make it possible for artists raising kids to hang out with artists who are not raising kids? I'm not really interested in having like parent night at the art gallery. There's a lot of like family activities that are specifically they're basically for children with parents along, and then there's a lot of activities that are mainly for adults, and sometimes you bring a child. But I'm really interested in making all of that. I think there's a lot to be gained from making all of it a lot more intergenerational. So what we tried doing, and this is what we applied for a Propeller grant for, and I should say actually that, if I can go back for a minute, this was actually the drawing, this was one of the drawings that we submitted with our application. This was our utopian vision for art events. So our idea was to have these art events that actually happened, that happened on weekend mornings instead of Friday nights. They included free on-site childcare, which was the big one. So there was free on-site childcare, which meant that the adults, whether they had kids or not, could be free to engage with the event. They're also welcome to bring their kids with them into the event, of course. But sometimes that doesn't work. So we wanted to have the option of having free childcare. And then it was also really important to us that all of the events were free for people to come. So, artists, as some of you know, are the most underpaid workers in the arts economy. And for anyone who's a parent, the equation of time equals money is really literal. Like if you need to go give an artist talk, if you need to go to an event, you either have to pay for childcare, so it's not free to go to those things or do those things anymore, or you have to negotiate with a family member or negotiate with a friend to make that possible. So you have to really choose which things you can go to. It becomes a whole different economy. So it was really important to us that both the childcare and the event be free, and also that anybody who was presenting had to get paid for their time. So we worked all of that into the grant, and we worked with institutions across the city, including the Art Institute of Chicago, Gallery 400, Glass Curtain Gallery, and the DePaul Museum of Art. And they were really fun. So we did several of those, and I'm going to talk about one of them in particular in a minute, but I also wanted to say that around the same time, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around why all of this activity started happening around the same time, but within the past 5 years, I would say, there's been a lot of activity around this issue. So in my sort of extended family, in our extended family of people dealing with care work and contemporary art. There are projects like Enemies of Good Art in London, which their name is taken, I don't know if anyone knows the Cyril Connolly quote, "There's no greater enemy of good art than the pram in the hallway." Sort of sums up that whole idea of parenthood versus art. They're separate, right? So they did this whole series where they went to the Tate London and staged this guerrilla childcare collective where everybody was watching each other's kids, but they made a big scene in Turbine Hall where all of these kids came, and then they would take turns going to see the show and watching each other's kids. So they've been really active in London. There's this group. This At Home Studios is actually an offshoot of a group called the Mothership Project that's based in Ireland. And the At Home Studios is a great project where they realized that a lot of them had studios at home and they couldn't get out they weren't interacting in the same way they would if they were in a collective studio building. So they developed this network where they would bring in critics and they would visit each other's studios and they would try to work with the isolation of being a parent that way. Lenka Clayton, this artist Lenka Clayton in Pittsburgh, has done this incredible project that started out as her own practice, where she applied for a grant that would allow her to work from home and have that be an artist residency. So she got funding for the residency. She made signage and business cards, and she made all this really amazing work out of the situation of documenting raising a child. It was very funny, interesting work. But then once it was done, she's made this residency into something that anyone can apply for, anyone can participate in, and have it be online. And she's created so there's a whole residency kit with like signage you can print out and these letters and things. She's also created a Red Thread grant that allows artists to be granted a certain amount of money, and then they pass it on when they're able to. They pass it on to another artist who's applied. So it's a really generous, interesting project. And then Andrea Franke, she's also in London. She was going to a college. She was going to a university where they actually had institutional childcare as part of the college for the students, for the staff, for the faculty. And I just found out recently that UIC used to have that, which I had never known.
Well, it's this again.
Mm-hmm. They restarted it?
Yes.
That's great. All right. So they restarted it. So there are a lot of institutions where there used to be childcare and there isn't now, which is something that she really works on actively. But this Invisible Spaces of Parenthood was in reaction to the nursery where she was going to grad school closed down while she was a grad student. And so she was really like, oh, what am I going to do now? So she actually pulled together childcare workers and created a creche or a nursery in the gallery for the duration of the whole graduate student exhibition that cared for kids of all of the faculty, staff, and students who had been affected by this loss. And she's since gone on to do a lot of work actually talking with care workers around labor issues as well, which is a really interesting conversation that's come out of it. This is the Hound's Den. In Chicago, it's funny because this is a really, it's not like apartment galleries are exotic here, right? Like I feel like we're like the center of the apartment gallery. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like it's true. Domestic gallery spaces have been a thing here for, they're really a part of Chicago's art community in an amazing way. But elsewhere, I think it's a lot rarer, maybe. But the Hound's Den is interesting because they put family sort of at the center of their statement about their gallery. So I'm just going to read a little bit of what they have on their website. They say, as a family of artists, it remains important that we are inclusive and not exclusive. Throughout history, being a successful artist and a committed parent were mutually exclusive endeavors. We aim to provide a space that does not perpetuate this notion. We believe that the art world can benefit by accommodating all family types as well as single artists, fully integrating a more holistic and sustainable venue. So they always invited artists to come and do shows with the understanding that like a family would be living there, a kid might be drawing on it, they invited people to really make things that could be lived with in a different kind of way. So if any of you have been in the show in the gallery, you may have seen this chalkboard. This is kind of my, it's a mind map of how all of these things intersect, my drawing practice and my sort of community organizing work, and these other things that I'm looking at. I also see it sort of as a family tree, right? Like it's this extended kinship system, my extended family. And I've gotten really, really interested in this kind of creative problem solving and collective systems of care that come out of, that come directly in response to these challenges that come up. I think sometimes, not that I want the challenges, but I think sometimes these challenges can create really rich, results as people respond to them. So having limited resources, feeling isolated, and having barriers to accessibility have led to a lot of pretty amazing things. So I did this zine with cultural reproducers a couple years ago called Propositions, Manifestos, and Experiments. It's very much about that idea. So it's a zine of some of the projects that I mentioned. It's documenting their projects a little bit. It's also a zine about skill sharing and creative problem solving. And I'm interested in zines. We have a website, but I have always made these small press publications because I think there's a really different kind of, there's different systems of distribution for printed matter. There's different kind of care that goes into passing them along hand to hand, and you're going to find them in different ways, in someone's home, on their coffee table, in their bathroom, or if someone gives it to you by hand. So it was really important to me that we have this kind of printed material as well. So for the final event in our childcare supported series, Selena Trepp and I decided that we had done several of these events, and we had realized that as women providing childcare at art galleries, people were already starting to think of us as like the art babysitters, instead of thinking of this as like a model for like, here, institutions, here's what we want you to do. And we really we're not interested in being the art babysitters. And we didn't want the onus to be on us, right? We wanted the onus to be on institutions to recognize these issues and find ways to work with them. So but there was also like this whole community of artists now that was like, oh, we really want this. We want more of this. We want childcare at art events. We want, we want to be able to participate. We want that opportunity, and we have a lot to say. So what we decided to do for our final event was this program called Making It What We Need. That was a generative workshop where we invited artists from the community, and we also invited a lot of other cultural producers. So like people from local residencies, people from galleries and museums, and art critics, people who had, in many cases, they had never met each other. So it's actually a really important networking event for some people there. And we invited them to come, and we had this whole system of worksheets that people filled out that was really about identifying barriers, dreaming about what structures could be set in place that might, like in a perfect world, address those barriers, and then actually working backwards to find concrete steps to get there. So some of that we did in a really short amount of time because of the childcare factor, but some really amazing ideas came out of that workshop actually, and some of them are now happening, including we had like let's see, I'm trying to think of some of them. One thing that we didn't have at the time that we have now that's been really successful is just to have an online forum. At the time we just had a website that I updated. And it was kind of hard for people to jump in. You could write something in the comments section, but there wasn't much of a conversation happening. So now we have a pretty active online forum with more than 300 people on it from all over the world. And there are very lively conversations happening there pretty much all the time. And people will write if they want people to come to their show. People will also write if they're like, how do you deal with when your kids start school and and you can no longer work it out in the studio in the same kind of way. So that's been a really valuable thing. And we also have started a remote reading group that people can participate in from home. And we're working right now on an artist design toolkit for institutions. So again, looking to these kind of collective groups that I mentioned earlier, and individual artists working with these issues to think about how the sort of structure of the possibilities of participation operate in institutions, and how we might work with those differently, like how we might shake that up a little. So at the same time that all of this was happening, these systems of support and this creative problem solving was really infiltrating my drawing. And I will say that my drawing for me is I do both of these things at the same time, but the drawing is a way for me to sort of take what's happening literally in my real life, and just take that to like expand that in a way that I couldn't. I'm not gonna create like a women-run society like tomorrow, but I can through my drawings I can kind of think through these much larger ideas. I can think through, and maybe not even in detail, but just thinking through like just snapshots of how it could work or what that might look like. Yeah. So I've been really interested in that, and again looking to other organisms for models. So like, again, the underground societies of wasps here, but also looking to things that have been written about in speculative fiction and things that have existed in history that those histories have literally sort of been buried. This one's based on this underground city in, I think it's called, I'm going to really mangle the name. Someone can correct me if I'm way off here. I think it's Derinkuyu. It's in Turkey, and it's this whole underground city. It really looks like an ant colony. But it was a whole underground city that was dug into the earth there because it's built on volcanic rock, which is very easy to dig into. So they actually dug all of these tunnels and rooms and caves, and they had like schools down there. They had huge city down there, and these were people who were hiding from religious persecution. So I'm really interested in kind of looking at other forms of architecture and other systems of society that way. I'm also really interested in, like thinking about collaborative problem solving. Another aspect of that is just thinking about how adults and children can learn from each other. Not just in a parent-child relationship, but just, adults and children have, I think we assume that it's always adults teaching the children, but there's so much to be gained from the other way around as well. This is a piece that I really have always loved by Dennis Oppenheim called Two-Stage Transfer Drawing, that I think, I don't know, I don't think I need to say too much about it, but just this idea of kind of transferring energy and ideas through another human, and how that translation changes things, but also it's like this energy passing through the body. It's really interesting to me. And in terms of that transference and that problem solving, one thing that since having a child, one problem that I have been really grappling with, and I think a lot of us have, is just what the future is going to look like, right? Like, I am not. I think it's hard right now to be very confident about what kind of a future younger generations are going to have, or even this generation. But I think that having a child has kind of opened up this emotional sort of time travel for me. I think as adults we live a lot in our heads, and the longer that we live, and I'm, hopefully, I don't think I'm the only person that feels this way, but the longer you live, the faster it seems like time goes, right? Like, all of a sudden you're like, what? That was a year? What? That was 10 years? And to small children, time is so much less compressed, right? They've experienced a lot less of it. So as an adult, when you spend time with small children, you have this different kind of relationship. It really is kind of this weird sort of time travel, like literally. You have to live in the moment in this other kind of way. You have to slow down, even though sometimes it's painful. And it reminds you of times in your own past you really vividly remember times from your own childhood. It also connects you with past generations, and you're like, oh, I wonder if it was like this for my grandmother. I wonder if it was like this for my ancestors. But also having a child, especially now, I think, really forces you to imagine a future beyond your own lifetime, which is something that I think I had thought about abstractly before, but now that I actually, have a pretty deep relationship with someone who will hopefully be there beyond my lifetime, I think about it a lot. And I should say that this drawing is called Conversations About the Future. I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit more about that idea of time travel. So I've been in the process of that, reading a lot of books on architecture. I've been reading a lot of speculative science fiction, a lot of feminist sci-fi from 1915 to the present. A lot of books on adventure playgrounds and thinking about how the play structures that we set up for children really affects how they deal with power and hierarchies as adults, right? And of course, looking at a lot of animals, a lot of insects, insect sociality. And so all of these things, I think, maybe to some people seem like completely different categories, but for me they all start intersecting in these really interesting ways. And that's, I have this research table in there, which is basically like my bookcase in my studio, but in the gallery. It's been really nice to be in there and have people come talk to me, and I'm like, oh, you should see this book, and I just like get all geeked out, and I want to show them this page of this book and this other book they should totally read. So it's been really nice to do that. But so I draw on all of these sources that to me make perfect sense together. And so this is that whole installation that's in there is called the Center for Pragmatic Optimism. And it's sort of built out of all of the things that are going on in my head, right? I don't know that I'm always terribly optimistic about the future, but I think it can be useful to imagine the future that you want. You know, like with that Making It What We Need workshop that I was talking about a moment ago, this idea of identifying a problem, in this case, a very large problem, which is that a lot of things are going wrong in the world right now. But identifying one problem and thinking about possible, maybe not possible solutions, but a possible best case scenario, maybe, a better case scenario for the future, and then thinking like, what would the steps be to work backwards from that? Maybe that's a very American way to go about it, very goal-oriented. But I think I think of it more as a place to experiment from. Yeah, yeah. It's a place to kind of speculate from and think through, much as these science fiction writers that I'm looking at, like Marge Piercy, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Octavia Butler. These are all people who are really pulling on these, taking these ideas and trying to flesh out possibilities there. And so you'll find a lot of those sources there, and then that's my mind map, kinship family tree on the blackboard. And then that whole structure in there is sort of this, it's a projection of a structure because that structure doesn't exist, right? I'm imagining these structures for these collective groups, these groups that prioritize care in whatever form, whether it's care for the environment or care for other human beings, parenting or activism in all these different ways, and imagining structures for them to inhabit, to support them and their needs. And then you'll also find in there my future foremothers, which I will say, this is just like the start of my list of future foremothers, but I was really interested in kind of acknowledging, I think often we try to distance ourselves from the people that we are referencing because we're worried about, I don't know what we're worried about, but I felt like there were all these really important people who are influencing my work that I have not acknowledged. And I was also thinking about like, wow, if I could like assemble a dream team of like mythological figures who could, if their combined ideas could create the future that I want my daughter to live in, who would be on that team? So this is I have like 6 women that are the start of this. One of them is my daughter, by the way, who's been a really big influence on my thinking. One of them is Marge Piercy, Frida Kahlo. This is Selena Trepp on the left, Octavia Butler, and Joanna Macy, who I don't think I talked about here. Let's see if I talk about her in a minute. Yes. That would be great, actually. Yeah, it's like strobing at me. I'm like, I've learned to block out so much that I was just like, whatever, that's how it is.
You've done a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I should actually mention, Joanna Macy I took out the slide where I was going to talk about her more in depth, but Joanna Macy is an environmental activist who I think not very many people in the arts know about, but she's a really interesting person because she does something that has also really extended this idea for me of time travel. She talks about the work of the imagination, which again, like as an artist, that's something that's resonates with me. and she does these, they're called despair and empowerment workshops. She does these mainly with environmental activists, where they all sit in these 2 concentric circles and do this mindfulness exercise where the inner circle of people imagines that they're themselves now, and the outer circle of people has to put themselves in the place of being a being, I forget how long, 200 years in the future, maybe longer, without knowing or speculating what situation they will be in, or how many of them there will be, or how they're living, right? So she has them go through this process. It's very, it's a guided visualization. They're very relaxed, and you kind of go to the space, and basically it's a conversation between the current generation and the future generation, which again, like, comes back to this idea of time travel. I don't think anymore of time travel as this, like, science fiction idea. I think it's something that we actually can, that a lot of us experience just by you know, like, if you have a kid, by slowing down, experiencing time at a different speed, by thinking about the future in a mindful and, like, really attentive way, and picturing the future. So her idea of having this conversation, you know, it's much more than just thinking, oh, I wonder what they would say to me. There's this really kind of emotional thing that happens between the beings of the future and the beings of the now. That's very much about empathy for us now, and what we're going through, and the choices that we're making, and the decisions that we have to make. That I think is really potent as we think about this era that we live in, but also, yeah, as an artist, like, as artists, what options we have, how we can think about these things, and how we can kind of shape what happens in the future, and yeah, open up an actual kind of time travel in a way. So for me, these communities, it seems like I've really diverged from this idea of the body that I started out with, but I haven't. For me, these communities that I'm talking about are really, really interconnected with the ways that I think about the human body. In researching these communities of care that exist out here, I can't help but also think about all of the things that we're learning about the organisms, the communities, and the ecosystems that exist inside our own bodies. We're learning so much about the bacteria that make up really most of our bodies, made up of bacteria. And the bacteria and those colonies and how imbalanced they are really defines not only how physically healthy we are, everything from, like, your blood sugar to your how you gain weight or lose weight, but also it affects your behavior, it affects your mental health. And so I think a lot about the microbiome, which is those ecosystems inside of us, and the relationships between those and the environments that we live in as humans. So right now we're really, really in this very self-focused time and culture here in the US. But what if we had another way of relating this idea of care, of self-care, of collective care, of care for the planet? If we could connect those things through our own bodies and our own bacterial ecologies, like, what would that mean? How would that change things? So what is tiny and what is huge for me is really, like, it's a really relative thing. Also in terms of time, space and time. And I don't know if anybody's had the chance to do this part of the show yet, but there's a guided tour in there that is something that you have to sign up for. It happens twice a day. But I'm really interested in this idea, you know, like, of what's happening in your mind and how that impacts what's happening in your body and vice versa. And I was really interested in thinking about not only how I could translate sensory experience in the form of drawings, but also how I could maybe transform physical experience, or rather call attention to the sensation that we feel, but we often, like, are too busy to pay much attention to because we're looking at our cell phones all the time. So to think about the body in this other kind of expansive way, I wanted to do something with sound that doesn't have images. I guess there's one image there, but the imagery of the guided piece is really all about imagery that you create. So it's a guided tour, but there are these spaces that open up for you can't call it the viewer, but they're tours that allow you to kind of imagine the architecture inside your body in this whole other way. And for me, that very much connects back to thinking about our bodies as environments, and rethinking anatomy and rethinking what's possible there. Oh, let's see. It doesn't want to go forward. My computer is stuck. I have one more slide, I think. Let's see if it moves forward. I have one more slide, but basically, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I think with all of this work, I'm just really interested in thinking about systems of care, thinking about how whether one has children or does not have children, is caring for an aging parent or dealing with an illness, or dealing with any of the larger sort of socio-political issues that's going on right now, that have been going on but have become more visible lately. How we can support each other and create new systems of support, how thinking about the body might change the ways that we do that, and yeah, how we can create new models and new systems for care and support. I don't know where that last image is, but I'll end there. And if anybody has questions, feel free to ask me.
So I have a microphone here, and I would love it if people have questions, if they could use the microphone, because we're recording today's event for people who couldn't be here. So if you have a question, I'll come with the microphone for you. Or a comment. Anybody?
You had brought up, I don't know, I mean, I sort of answered you already, but I thought, can you tell me your name again?
Sure,
Annette. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a question exactly, but I think you addressed it in a different way in your talk, but having just come from the gallery and seeing your work about sort of the underpinnings of a really healthy society in which, people care for one another's children as well as their own, where things aren't quite as, the nuclear family isn't the pinnacle, right? Then my question is, understanding the focus on childbearing and child rearing, having done it myself but a long time ago. So since I'm sort of beyond that personally, now I'm thinking about we've got 7 billion and who knows how many more. That was a couple of years ago. People in the world, what are we going to do about that? I find myself, and right now I'm reading something about the plague and how ecological crises interact with how natural history and ecological crises interact with human societies and their development. What if we hadn't had the plague? What if we never had any wars?
Right.
We would be at the 20 billion level, and we probably would already be completely destitute as a planet. So supporting, families and child rearing and childbearing, and then thinking about the ways in which we should be being, that's putting my judgment on it, but conscious of what the impact is on the earth, for all of us.
Overpopulation.
Yeah.
And I there's a group that we're hoping to bring in. I don't know if that's set in stone yet, but I think it's becoming more solid. So there's this group, Conceivable Futures, that actually really focuses on that idea, that is really focused on the idea of reproductive sovereignty, which is the choice of women having the choice to have children or not have children, and also having women kind of consider the impact of having more than one child. So understanding that we want to reproduce, some of us want to reproduce, but also considering that not everyone wants to or should or have to if they don't want to. And that certain populations, that often privileged populations, are the ones that can afford to reproduce more. So thinking about different populations there, that'll be a really interesting event to kind of dig into that more specifically, very specifically around the environment and the impact of human reproduction and over-reproduction on the environment. And I think also, I mean, we're in a particular time of, I don't know, I feel like we've moved so far away from systems of collective care that's maybe part of the problem of, not that overpopulation wouldn't be an issue, but I think that the fact that we see parenting as like either our problem or their problem, right? It's not, we don't see it as a problem. We don't see it as a problem, childcare as an issue unless we have children. I guess I'll put it that way. Or we don't see elder care as an issue if we don't have an aging parent to take care of. So thinking about how, as a culture, we can value those things and take care of each other, I think if we thought about that more and we were thinking about raising each other's kids and having all of that work a little bit more in a more integrated way, I don't know. I think that might help, because we would be thinking about, maybe caring for the planet more. Also, we would be thinking about caring for each other more. Right now, I think most of us are really caring about ourselves and our own needs. So I don't know. That doesn't really answer your question, but yeah, I think it's a really crucial piece of it. I'm not in any way advocating like, let's all go out and have kids and like make sure our needs are met and make sure that we have this. We have everything we need and no one else does. But yeah, I think that's a big piece of it, is thinking about like Charlotte Perkins Gilman in Her Land, as we talked about earlier, also really lays out this plan for this community in which women can reproduce without they can reproduce by themselves. Basically, there are no men in her society. But as part of that, they basically make a pact that no one has more than one child, and they, if they have any, and they all care for each other's children, and sort of everyone has their needs met that way. And that she was thinking about that in 1915, and writing about it in terms of overpopulation and resource use and systems of power, and how all of that would get thrown out of balance if we're not thinking about how those choices impact each other. So yeah, I think that's a really relevant point. Anybody else?
And your ideas about possible outcomes for the future and the sort of connection to animal systems was really interesting. And I don't really have a question, but it really connected to that idea. And I guess I was sort of wondering if if you were looking to matriarchal societies at all from the past also in some of your research. Maybe you mentioned that and I missed it, but
I mean, I am, but do you have any to recommend?
No, but I'm curious about it. It got me thinking about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I am too. There's the ones that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm trying to think. There's that exists a lot in other biologies of other organisms, and that anthropology of like bonobo monkeys, and there are other organisms that exist matriarchally, and there are certainly, I don't know, it depends on what you mean by matriarchal, because there are systems that are matriarchal now, but what that means, there are a lot of
right, yeah.
There are a lot of ways that works, yeah. But yeah, I am very, very interested in that. And I think even
matriarchal animal societies, matriarchal human societies.
right, yeah,
And I guess it's just sort of connecting to what was just said, like this idea of the nuclear family as sort of, you know, the go-to ideal, and that maybe not that necessarily isn't working.
right, exactly. I mean, I think I was just at a conference. If you can believe that there's such a thing, that there's a conference recently in Canada that I was a part of that was about contemporary art, motherhood, and the Anthropocene. So it was about global climate change and motherhood and artists. And one of the speakers there was talking very much about like extended kinship systems in native cultures, in indigenous cultures, and how these non-nuclear family structures were like completely working and active, but were kind of wiped out and buried by the model of the nuclear family, which was really, I mean, the whole purpose of it, right, was capitalism. It was all about ownership, and you own your wife and you own your children, and this is how these systems work, right? And it's a, you know, it's a system. I'm a part of it, but there are these other models that were kind of, that were eliminated, that I think I didn't know about, and a lot of people maybe aren't aware of. We think of the system as like the only way things can be because they're because it's the way that things are. Yeah, it's because it's what we know. But yeah, I am really interested in that for sure. So yeah, the idea of choosing your own family or creating these kind of extended kinship systems is something that that is, you know, happening more and more now. Certainly in the LGBTQ communities, and then, but also just people choosing to live intergenerationally to support their elders and to support other families living together as alternate, you know, alternatives to what we think of as the only way. I think that's gaining in popularity, which is nice to see.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation and all the work that you do for Chicago arts community and beyond. But as a new mom and as an artist, I'm just wondering, like, what are certain things that we could do on an individual level to kind of, you know, fight for these causes, or, you know, demanding for childcare within our honorarium? Like, what are certain things, like small things that we could start doing?
That's a great question. I actually just wrote a whole article about that.
Oh, awesome. I'll read it.
that I can forward to you, but if you want to Google it, it's called "Who Cares for Whom?" And it's posted on Cultural Reproducers and Temporary Art Review also. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways that there are all these collectives working on things together, but that takes a certain amount of time and focus that, you know, away from your own practice. But I think there's a lot of ways actually that individual people can take that on or challenge the systems that exist. And one of them, you were just saying, to ask for. I think it's really important for all artists to ask for honorarium. And when you're a parent, like I said, like that equation is so literal of time equals money. And I think just making it visible by saying like, hey, it's actually gonna cost me money to give that artist talk for your group. Is there any amount of money that you could offer that would offset the cost of childcare? And even if they can't, at least they're like, oh God, we should be thinking about that, right? So I think even small things like just asking to get paid, and if you're comfortable saying why, putting that in there. I think when you give an artist talk, even if it's not part of your practice, to just mention. I remember as a student, somebody offhandedly mentioning the childcare arrangement they had worked out to have studio time, and I was like, oh my God, I've never heard anyone even, you know, I had no idea that you could even do that, right? Or even, you know, if you're acknowledging that it's super hard, I think just making it visible is a really big thing that can be done. Yeah, and you do a great job of that, actually. So, Yeah.
There are a couple. There are a couple of resources that are really relevant to your research, and one of them, oh well, it's gone now, but it was a book by a cultural historian, Rianne Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade. Have you heard about this? Where she proposes, it was written in the 80s, she proposes a non-dominator model.
What?
A non-dominator model. So most, societies are patriarchal. There's only one that I'm aware of in India that's matriarchal, but that it used to be quite common that there were non-dominator models where there was an egalitarian. This was, prehistoric, and she's done archaeological work and made suppositions to discover this. And then, have you read Ursula Le Guin?
Yeah.
Because she's someone who proposes some really interesting and unique societal reconfigurations. They're not necessarily feminist,
Right.
but they're so different. It helps, I think, in the effort to think about what if things were really different circumstances. Then how could we shape things differently?
Yeah.
I agree. I think science fiction is really important in helping people reformulate their ideas about what the future might be, and have actually ended up making changes in our lives. The way people think about technology and how it could and should be used science fiction has had a tremendous impact on that.
Right. Yeah, I think we're in a time now when, I don't know, science fiction used to seem so science fiction-y, and now it seems like, oh my God, maybe these are possible roadmaps, or like not in a literal sense necessarily, but yeah, I don't know, like we're part of this system that is just really crumbling all around us right now. I think it's become really important to look at these other models and just like find ways to think outside of that. Just and I don't necessarily think I don't think of these things as utopian necessarily, because the idea of a utopia sounds so like everything is worked out. But just to experiment. I think that's. We're in a place where maybe we need to start experimenting more, and just imagining other possibilities.
Well, thank you, Christa. And I invite anybody who wants to ask more questions. Oh, you have one more? Okay.
So I was wondering if you thought it was important for the apartment gallery to actively recognize domesticity, like femininity, and the vernacular, because so often we see it being stripped. And is it important that we have those intersections more, or?
I don't know if I feel like it's important. I think apartment galleries operate in so many different ways, and some of them are run by like single dudes in their 20s, and like I think I would hope that the apartment can be viewed in a whole range of ways, but I do think it's interesting where Chicago is really interesting because we have like the suburban, which was started by Michelle Grabner because she was living in the suburbs and couldn't get. She decided to bring she and Brad Killam decided to bring the art world to them, and they were really, really successful in that. So we really have this history of people doing that, but I don't think it needs to maintain this relationship with the domestic. I think it's interesting when people acknowledge that. I think that's one way it can operate. But I also, like anything else, I think it's really important to have a diverse range of approaches to things like that. Yeah.
One more thing. I thought it was really interesting, that idea of like, in practice versus in theory, and sort of like being a grad student a long time ago, but the kind of like the sort of in theory of becoming a parent versus actually becoming one and being an artist, and just how difficult that terrain is. But also, one thing that I was thinking a lot about during your lecture was this idea of just like, and you just said it too, and I think it's really important, like this idea of voicing it, having this like pluralistic attitude, but like towards her question, but then also kind of like I guess I'm thinking of like specific examples of, when I first became a mother and how sort of like shocking, but how much I actually judged myself.
Yeah.
And was faced with like my own preconceptions about like what I was supposed to be like as a mother and an artist. So anyway.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, we're in this time when all these artists are making projects about it that I think we're in danger of slipping into like what the corporate world has done, which has gone into this place of like lean in, like you've got to work twice as hard, even though you haven't had any sleep and you're caring for someone else the whole day, but you still have to like have the same creative output, and you feel really guilty if you can't. I don't think that's really a good. That's certainly not what I'm going for. So yeah, I think just acknowledging and making it visible as one of many possible options. It will hopefully just create a diverse range of approaches, right? Like, you don't have to be Tracy Emin or Marina Abramovic. I mean, you can be, that's fine, but you can also be someone who is making work maybe at a slower pace for a while and who is really engaged in this other kind of way. And parenting can open up these other kinds. I mean, for me, it's really opened up this whole other thing. But that doesn't mean it's it doesn't mean it's like easy. But yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we'll end there. And I invite anybody who has any additional thoughts or questions to talk to Christa individually. Thank you, Christa.
Thank you. And you should turn the camera on the kids for a minute. You should turn the camera on the kids for a minute, just because I think that's amazing what's been happening over here during the whole talk. Yay for them.